Welcome to the Holistic Living Podcast, my beautiful friends. You can expect my uncensored, real, and honest thoughts on a wide variety of health topics. If you love to learn on ways to improve your health, your life, your mindset, your emotions, and everything in between in a natural way, you are in the right place, and I am so excited to have you here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 22 of the Holistic Living Podcast. Today, we are talking about MTHFR gene and the variants that come with it. I'm sure if you have been doing any kind of holistic research, you've come across the MTHFR, at least to a certain degree. Well, today I'm going to explain more on what it is, how it affects our health, who typically has this genetic SNP, and much more information as well. Before I do, though, I want to go into a little bit of the definitions of some of the terms we'll be using. I know a lot of people are really new to the concept of genetics and understanding what it means and how it works. So I want to dive in, break that down a little bit. This will be the boring part of the podcast, but we will get through this part super quick and then we'll get to all the good stuff. So let's start with talking about a gene. A gene is a specific sequence of DNA, and it serves as the basic unit of heredity. Together, all of our genes with their distinct pairings and order are called the human genome. So genomics is the study of the structure and function of the genome, an organism's complete set of genetic instructions, which is unique to all of us. So genetic testing investigates specific areas of our DNA, which is our personal genetic information, that are known to be associated with our outward physical characteristics, and when it comes to nutrition, how we metabolize or respond to certain nutrients. I love the study of nutrigenomics, and it's something I offer to my clients in my practice because it really tells us so much about each individual and their susceptibilities to disease. So the field of nutrigenomics includes the study of individual differences at the genetic level that can affect responses to health and nutrition. And it offers new possibilities to healthcare providers like myself or doctors and other practitioners and their patients to use the nutrigenomics and this advanced knowledge that comes with it about the human genome to help improve health and wellness pretty much through nutrition and some supplementation. So with this information, now that we are able to do nutrigenomics and it's available to us, it provides us healthcare practitioners with easy to understand nutritional and lifestyle recommendations that are personalized for each person. And so that's why it is a huge part of my practice. And I encourage as many people as possible to look into the concept of nutrigenomics or the field of nutrigenomics and potentially incorporate it. Okay, let's talk about SNPs. You'll hear the term SNPs quite a bit through this podcast, but also just if you start looking into MTHFR. So I thought I would just give you a little bit of a definition of what SNPs are. So the most common type of a human genetic variation is called a single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNP, which we say SNP. Often referred to as a SNP, with more than 10 million SNPs present in the human genome, they serve as biomarkers or signposts that have the potential to inform us about an individual's traits and then can help guide, again, healthcare providers when creating a plan of care. Not all SNPs matter, so the most important is the ones that have a clinical relevance, so that when somebody comes to me, for example, and they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of SNPs, we're not looking at all of them. We're focusing on the ones that have been clinically studied and that have clinical significance. So SNPs are sections of DNA, and each SNP will represent a genetic variation in a single DNA building block in a gene sequence called a nucleotide. While most SNPs have no effect on a person's health or development, some can help inform about lifestyle choices and health and wellness outcomes. We're almost done with the definitions. Let's quickly talk about traits because these are really important as well. Traits are specific characteristics like eye color, blood type, or the ability to tolerate lactose that are based on an individual's unique genetic variations as well as environmental factors. Several SNPs directly affect nutrient assimilation and response to supplementation. And that's why when we're doing the the field or practice of nutrigenomics, we are wanting to take a targeted approach, looking at vital data related to clinically relevant SNPs and their associated traits, and then use those results as the basis for making personalized nutrition and lifestyle recommendations. So knowing someone's traits and their genetic SNPs, the relevant ones, it can tell us whether or not they need to be on vitamins, minerals, omegas, whether or not they need detox support or glucose metabolism support, whether or not their metabolic system might need to be supported, or their cognitive health or their immune health, or whether they need to be supported in terms of their energy and fitness or cardiovascular or GI health. So it really gives us so much insight into how a person's body might be lacking in certain areas or might need more support in certain areas. So a SNP just represents a genetic variation in which a single DNA building block within a gene sequence called a nucleotide is substituted for another. So in a really quick example, the nucleotide A is substituted for G. Now, not all SNPs affect gene function or have health implications, like I said earlier, but some SNPs can influence the metabolism or utilization of certain nutrients. Once we understand the impact of certain genetic SNPs on nutritional needs and physiological function, we can arrive at a more personalized approach for optimizing health. And that's why it's so important that we don't just look at the different genes that people have, but specifically the SNPs as well. So now that you understand a little bit, maybe you remembered some of this, maybe you have no clue what I'm talking about, don't stress. We are going to now explain a little bit about what MTHFR is, and as I move through, I'm sure all of this will make more sense for you. So we have different variants. So everyone carries 2 copies of every gene, and a SNP may affect one or both copies of the gene that everybody carries. So each result, so when someone's going through genetic testing and they come back with these pages and pages from Ancestry or 23andMe listing all of the traits that the person has, all the SNPs, they're also going to go into the variant that that person has. So it's going to tell you the predisposing variant and whether the individual who has gone through testing has that variant and whether they should consider action. So I'll give you an example. For example, someone might have the trait for lactose intolerance. The SNP is called MC-M61. Now, there are 2 risk variants. There's AG and GG. Okay, those are the risk variants. So if the person who had the testing for the lactose intolerant trait has one or both of the risk variants, so AG and GG, then they would need to consider action to support them with their lactose intolerance. So that means avoiding lactose and doing some other things. If a person has a different variant like AA, which is not a risk variant for lactose intolerance, then they don't need to take action. And so this is what we're referring to where you have your SNP, you have your trait, but you also have risk variants. And if somebody has the risk variant, that's where they will need to take action. So if you have MTHFR, a risk variant of like both copies of the gene, then you'll need to take action to support your methylation. And if not, you don't need to worry. So a trait is a physical characteristic or predisposition. And every SNP has a universal identification number, and since genes may have multiple SNPs, the number that is listed after each SNP is really important when you're getting your results looked at and compared through genetic testing. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave that there. There's a lot more information to look into, going into heterozygous and homozygous genotypes and all kinds of things, which I'm not going to get into in this podcast because I don't want this to be like super boring in a textbook. I want to just explain a little bit about MTHFR, but I thought I'd give you some definitions since there will be some terminology that I'll be using just so you don't feel completely lost. Okay, so what are MTHFR genes or polymorphisms? Like I said, you've probably heard this a lot through the health world. The first thing I want to say before we even go into what this is it is so common to have this genetic SNP or SNPs. Most people that I work with, like most of my clients who have it, they are always coming to me and they're like, I have MTHFR, and they're panicking and they're like, this is so rare. And I'm like, no, most people actually have it, by the way. And there's so much we can do to support it. So it's not something you need to stress about at all. And it's not something that you have to feel you're so unlucky to have, because it is so, so common. And the more people that have these SNPs, these traits, these genetic variants, it gets passed on to our children. And so the more of us that have it and the more children that we have, the more and more people will have this MTHFR gene. So it is getting really common. And what I typically see is people who have chronic illnesses or chronic inflammation in general are typically the ones that have MTHFR. So most of the time, if you have some kind of autoimmune or something like that, there's a good chance you have the MTHFR gene. You can go ahead and get genetic testing done through Ancestry, 23andMe, or something like that to confirm if you would like, but oftentimes it's not necessary. When I am working with clients, I treat them like they have the MTHFR SNP. So we do support for their methylation. We make sure that they're not taking certain nutrients that their body can't break down, which I'll go into. And we just pretend that they have it. And that way, if they do, they're being supported. And if they don't, well, they still are getting a great protocol. Okay, so MTHFR. What is it? So it is a gene, and it codes for an enzyme known as methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. The short form is MTHFR. This is an enzyme that's responsible for converting 5,10-methylene THF to 5-methyl-THF. This is just essential for the conversion of the amino acid homocysteine and methionine, both of which are needed, for liver detoxification and so many other things. So this enzyme is very important for the production of DNA and methylation pathways that are essential for all bodily functions. And MTHFR also plays a central role in the transformation of folate to SAM. We call it SAM, but it's S-adenosylmethionine. This SAM is a universal methyl donor in our cells, and it affects our DNA methylation status. So there are two main MTHFR SNPs. Genetic variations in the MTHFR gene results in reduced activity of the enzyme that's produced and has been associated with a series of diseases and conditions, including cardiovascular disorders, neurological defects, some forms of cancer, psychiatric disorders, diabetes, and pregnancy complications. The two most common MTHFR mutations or polymorphisms found in humans are the C677T, which is a mutation, has the A allele and is associated with reduced enzyme activity and elevated total homocysteine levels and altered distribution of folate. People with the A allele for this mutation present a 35% decrease of the normal enzyme activity, and AA allele individuals a 70% decrease. So if you have both alleles, you go from 35% decrease of normal enzyme activity to 70% decrease, which is quite high. The other SNP is MTHFR A129AC, and this mutation also impacts MTHFR enzyme activity and homocysteine levels, but to a lesser extent. So you could have both SNPs, or you could just have one. If you have both, there's a lot more work that needs to be done to support your methylation. If you just have the A129AC, it does affect your enzyme activity, but nowhere near as much. So to a lesser extent compared to the C677T mutation or SNP. And if you have both alleles within that SNP, you have a 70% decrease of enzyme activity. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I explained that okay. The enzymatic activity of MTHFR in people with one minor allele in each MTHFR C677T and the A129AC polymorphisms is lower than the activity present if only one SNP had a single minor allele. So essentially what they're saying is that if someone has one single minor allele in one of the SNPs, if that's all that's present, their enzyme activity is greater than someone who has both alleles and or both SNPs. Reduced MTHFR enzyme activity results in a decreased conversion of the amino acid homocysteine to methionine and accumulation of homocysteine in the blood. Abnormally elevated homocysteine levels are referred to as this condition. It's called homocystinuria, and this elevation of homocysteine levels in the blood can increase susceptibility to a number of health conditions. There's been a series of studies that have linked MTHFR polymorphisms, especially the C677T, which is the greater of the two, with various types of diseases, but the results are sometimes conflicting because it does also depend on ethnicity and the presentation of the disease in different populations around the world. One thing I will say is there are a host of conditions linked to MTHFR, especially the C677T variant. But before I go into that, I do want to say and put a side note in here. You can have the genetics, like you can have the traits, you can have MTHFR, but not have it be activated. Okay, so if you got these SNPs passed down from your parents, but you have lived a super healthy lifestyle, you've been doing things to support your body, you've been doing regular detoxes, you do your deep breathing, you exercise, you sleep well, you're supporting your body properly, these SNPs are not actually probably active. So you have them, and like we always say, our genetics, it's like the gun, but our lifestyle is the trigger. So you can have the gun, but that trigger never has to be pulled. You don't have to have the side effects and all the damage that comes with these mutations if your lifestyle is really healthy. So we'll circle back to that, but that's something that I did want to mention, because having the MTHFR mutations does not mean essentially you're screwed. It just means that you need to be doing things to support your methylation, because your body is more susceptible to these different health conditions because you have poor methylation. I hope that helps and makes sense as well. So some of the conditions linked to MTHFR, the C677T mutation specifically, and this is for having one or both alleles. First is strokes, heart disease, high blood pressure, male infertility, depression, autism spectrum disorders, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, ADHD, migraines, diabetes and diabetic kidney problems, schizophrenia, unipolar depressive disorder and bipolar disorder, cancer. Cancer actually has been previously demonstrated to be an issue because the folate deficiency can increase the incidence of different forms of cancer, and MTHFR is directly involved in folate metabolism, and therefore MTHFR mutations may have an impact on the development of cancer like prostate, ovarian, esophageal, stomach. Stomach cancer specifically is people with the A allele were more likely to develop stomach cancer after an H. pylori infection. Also bladder cancer, brain cancer, lung, kidney, head and neck cancer, colon, and other cancers as well. Specifically for colon cancer, more side effects came from a certain treatment that they would undergo. But what I do want to say here is all of these things that you have all of these things that you could form are either coming from the A allele or the AA genotype. Whichever that you do have, either way, just having the MTHFR mutation, regardless of whether it's the A or the AA allele or genotype, you're still more susceptible to all kinds of conditions. And some more conditions to list are hearing impairment, hormonal issues, PCOS, lower bone mineral density, cluster headaches, epilepsy, arterial diseases, worse outcomes for end-stage kidney disease, adverse effects of methotrexate, and increased liver toxicity from taking methotrexate, recurrent pregnancy loss, preeclampsia, having a child with Down syndrome, neuronal tube defects, cleft lip and palate, I'm reading through this too quick, lower luteinizing hormone, that LH hormone, cataracts, alopecia, autoimmune conditions, colitis, and so much more. So these are all the conditions that you can have just for having an MTHFR mutation. Now, that's not to say you will develop these. That's, again, where the lifestyle really plays a huge role here. If you are doing nothing to support your methylation, which is what MTHFR drives, you are going to definitely have some kind of health issue in the future. But if you're taking care of your body and you understand that you have this genetic SNP, or you feel you might have it, even if you haven't had genetic testing done, if you have chronic illness, histamine issues, hormonal imbalance, elevated inflammation, there's a good chance you have the MTHFR. And if you do, my suggestion is pretend you have it, even if you haven't had testing for it, and support your body, support your methylation, and support your system to function properly because of this genetic SNPs that you have. So it's important to take these associations with a grain of salt. Obviously, if you have a genotype linked to low MTHFR activity and you're concerned about any particular health condition, you want to talk with your doctor about developing an appropriate strategy for prevention. But that's the key here. Take it with a grain of salt, because it does not mean you're going to develop all of those things that I just listed. You want to understand that all this means is you need to support what the MTHFR gene is lacking. Support your enzyme activity, support your homocysteine and your detox pathways and your methylation. And I'm going to explain to you how to do that. I am so tongue-tied today, guys. I'm sorry. I feel like there's more information in my head and I can't get it out as fast as I'm talking, and I'm just getting tongue-tied. So I apologize. Trying to be all professional here, and this podcast is all over the place. But let's move on. There is some testing that you can get done if you want to just kind of see like how things are going in your body. So you can ask your doctor for a homocysteine, it's a blood test, and folate test to just see how your levels are doing with that. It should be noticed that most of the studies done on MTHFR genes will only show correlations with diseases when homocysteine levels are high or folate levels are low. So that's where asking your doctor about getting your homocysteine or your folate tested can be really helpful. High homocysteine levels show that you may have a methylation issue or a B12/folate deficiency caused possibly due to the MTHFR mutation. And I'm going to explain here really quick. When you have the MTHFR mutation, your body cannot convert folic acid to folate. So if you're consuming folic acid during pregnancy, or even not if you're not pregnant, if you're taking a folic acid supplement, or you're consuming foods with folic acids, or plant-based milk with folic acid added to it, etc., it actually acts like a toxin to our body, to those of us who have the MTHFR, because our body cannot convert that folic acid into folate, which is the usable form of folic acid. And so it builds up in high levels and causes toxicity, and we are therefore folate deficient because we can't actually go through that conversion when we have MTHFR. So this is where it's really important to not touch folic acid if you have MTHFR, not in a multivitamin, not in a supplement, not through food. Do not consume folic acid that has been there's a lot of products out there where they fortify it with folic acid. Don't touch it. Only get folate in, and be very careful with that to prevent the folic acid toxicity and to support your folate levels, because a folate deficiency can cause a lot of and drive a lot of the conditions that I just listed previously. If your tests show a high homocysteine, your doctor will likely advise you on what to eat. So he'll give you a diet recommendation, or you can work with a nutritionist on what you can eat and some kind of supplements to take. The plan will likely include an increased intake of folate and B12, which is cobalamin, and B6, which is pyridoxal phosphate. And these have been found to affect the levels of homocysteine in the blood in a positive way. A vitamin-rich diet that includes fruits, vegetables, specifically lots and lots of dark leafy greens, so kale, bok choy, Swiss chard, arugula. And I can't stress this enough, cruciferous vegetables, which help to support your methylation. They help to pull out the toxins and help to support your homocysteine and your folate levels. These are what you need to be eating. Lots of dark greens, lots of cruciferous, along with eggs and red meat, which will provide the B vitamins needed to maintain low homocysteine levels. Additionally, supplementation with folate, B12, and B6 can help normalize homocysteine levels as well. So checking your MTHFR SNPs. MTHFR is an enzyme and it affects the methylation of all of our cells. Methylation is important for various biochemical conversions, which will determine the expression of your genes. So for MTHFR C677T, each A allele has been associated with lower methylation activity and higher homocysteine levels. So in other words, those who have one copy of the A allele were found to have MTHFR enzyme about 60 to 70% as effective as those without the A allele. But those with the 2 copies of the A allele, so the AA genotype, were found to have MTHFR enzyme of only 30 to 40% effective. So this is where you want to really be supporting your methylation if you have these SNPs. It's recently been shown that the human gut can convert the folate from food sources to 5-MTHF, which is the type of folate that our body can use very efficiently. However, its ability to convert supplemental folate is limited. Now, our gut can only do this conversion, though, if we have lots of probiotics. So you have to have a healthy gut for this to happen. Reduced folate is the bioavailable form of folate, which is easily absorbed and metabolized in the human body. So it's available as a supplement. It's usually labeled as methylfolate or L-methyltetrahydrofolate. So if you have those in either of your supplements, you're good to go. Additionally, you can supplement with methylvitamin B12 or methylcobalamin, the bioavailable form of vitamin B12 instead of the usual vitamin B12, which will also make access to B12 for your body easier. And if you are the homozygous for both the best known MTHFR mutations, so the AA and the GG genotypes, I would strongly recommend talking to a doctor about other supplementation and options. If you have both genotypes for both of the MTHFR mutations, you want a little bit more support than what I just mentioned. Okay, so let's go into what we can do in terms of a protocol for methylation. Methylation assists the body in many ways by adding methyl groups to the proteins so that they can be eliminated properly and safely. So these methyl groups can be bound to hormones like excess estrogen, histamine, toxic proteins, etc., so that they can exit the body rather than remaining and causing oxidative damage to our cells. DNA methylation, which is a process of adding a methyl group to DNA, which is done by a DNA methyltransferase, is a heritable or epigenetic alteration that can lead to cancer, atherosclerosis, nervous disorders, cardiovascular diseases. This is all happening when the methylation pathways are not working correctly. So I'm going to explain something really quick here. If you're still kind of confused about what this MTHFR thing is doing, MTHFR is a gene for our methylation. Okay, every single cell in our body, every single hormone, every single thing in our body needs to be methylated, where B vitamins are used to form a methyl group to methylate. So if you have histamine, for example, say you have a high histamine condition and you're inflamed and you have hives or you have seasonal allergies or whatever it may be, the way that histamine is actually pushed out of the body is it first goes through the detox process through the liver. It gets methylated. If your methylation pathways are working properly and you have enough folate and all of that, the histamine should get methylated. And then once it's methylated, it can leave through the liver. If the histamine does not get methylated, it cannot be eliminated. It cannot be detoxified. So then it just sits in the body and recirculates, and you end up with higher and higher and higher histamine levels. And the same applies to estrogen. If you have excess estrogen, which a lot of us do these days because of birth control and stress and endocrine disruptors and all kinds of things, if this estrogen is trying to leave the body, it needs to be methylated. So if it tries to go through the methylation process, but your methylation process is not working well, the estrogen can't get methylated and it can't eliminate. So it sits in our body. It becomes very toxic and carcinogenic and starts to cause these hormonal imbalances and the symptoms that come with it. And this applies to everything, all of the cells in our body. So it is crucial that we methylate properly, or we cannot detoxify and we cannot repair our cells and our tissues and all those other things. So this is why everyone's always freaking out about MTHFR, is because we understand the importance of methylation. That being said, again, don't panic. If you have one or both of the genetic SNPs and the genotypes as well, that just means you need more support than the average person for your methylation, which we can totally do. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. So when estrogen isn't methylated, I just kind of touched on this, it remains in the body. It becomes carcinogenic, leading to all kinds of common estrogenic cancers like prostate, ovarian, and breast cancer. If histamine cannot be eliminated, you can end up with histamine intolerance and extreme inflammatory conditions. And the list goes on. Methylation will also help us have healthy and balanced mood by supporting brain and nervous system function. There are many pathways involved in the methylation process, and if any or all of them are not functioning optimally, perhaps due to genetic SNPs, then you can end up with poor methylation, aka poor detoxification, and you may experience anxiety, depression, autoimmune diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease, nutrient deficiencies, thyroid imbalance, difficulty losing weight, and so on. So certain genetic SNPs make one susceptible to greater weaknesses in our methylation pathways, and getting genetic testing done is a great way to see where your potential weaknesses and strengths lie. Not all SNPs are bad, so some will tell us some benefits and good things about us as well, but where your potential weaknesses and strengths lie so that you can address them through proper nutrition and perhaps supplementation to ensure a properly functioning system. Now, I already touched on how you can get genetic testing done. So you can do it through Ancestry or 23andMe or one of those things, one of those sites. And it'll give you insight not only into your family history, but your genetic makeup. And this will help you better understand why you may be experiencing certain symptoms or health conditions. And they can also give you the knowledge you need to prevent potential health conditions as a result of your genetics. So I'm going to just really touch really quick on some of the genetic SNPs that are involved in the methylation process and some recommendations, so dietary and supplemental recommendations to support your body depending on the SNPs that you have. So Dr. Nathan Morris, he's amazing in terms of like working with people who have methylation issues, and he has shared some of his like must-have tests and even supplements as well if you have poor methylation. So I'm going to be sharing some of this information from him. Now, you can have one or all three alleles, so homozygous or heterozygous, and typically the more variants or alleles that you have of one particular SNP, the more support you may need. I do want to note that these SNPs that I'm mentioning are markers of genetic predisposition supported by a limited yet evolving body of evidence. So due to the many factors that modify their effects on physiology, a positive result does not necessarily mean that any or all of the recommended supplements are needed for you. So please listen to this information that I'm going to share in terms of supplements, but always check with your doctor or practitioner before supplementing. So the first SNP that really works and plays into the methylation process is our CBS gene. The SNP is C699T, and there are 3 different alleles or variants. This gene and having this SNP just means that you're going to have a higher conversion of homocysteine to cystathionine. So if you do have this gene, you want to make sure that you are having adequate intake of vitamin B6, so you might need to supplement in order to make sure that your homocysteine levels are where they need to be. Another really important SNP, which I see very commonly someone has if they have MTHFR, and this is the COMT gene, the SNP being Val158MET, and there are 3 different alleles for this as well. This gene and SNP, if you have it, means you usually will have reduced detoxification of catecholamines and estrogen. So this SNP is really affecting you for hormones, for hormone detoxification. So if you have PCOS or a hormonal imbalance, if you have endometriosis or fibroids or anything like that, this SNP could be at play along with your methylation SNPs as well. So if you do have this SNP, you want to manage stress with meditation and breathing exercises. You need to be eating an abundance of cruciferous vegetables, leafy greens, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, to support your estrogen metabolism. And you might want to consider supplementing with things like DIM, D-I-M, diindolylmethane, SAMe, even things like a B complex and magnesium and B12 as well. You might not need all of these. You might need 1 or 2. Maybe you do need all of them if you have this SNP, but always work with your doctor or practitioner to create a perfect plan. Another really important SNP is the FUT2. Their SNP is G772A, and this gene or SNP, if you have it, might mean modified risk of low B12 status. So this is potential for lower intestinal microbial diversity. So if you do have this SNP, you want to include more probiotics in your diet and also some fermented foods in your diet, as well as a B12 supplement. Now, we touched on the MTHFR SNPs. Having these just gives you a reduced ability to activate folates to the 5-MTHF. And so you want to increase your leafy greens, your vegetables. You want to have lots of cruciferous, and then consider supplementing with a folate, with a B complex. You can get the B6 in there as well, and the B12. And then, of course, there's other things you can do to further support your detox pathways if needed, like N-acetylcysteine or glutathione, things like that. Okay, so those are the main SNPs. Now, just some assessments that you can ask your doctor for if interested to see any of these things that I mentioned. If they're a concern for you, you can ask your doctor for a plasma B6 test or a serum homocysteine test as well. And they will determine where your homocysteine levels are at. You can also ask them for a urinary estrogen metabolite ratio test. This will just indicate how effectively you are methylating estrogens. Especially it's important if you are premenopausal or if your luteal phase is really late or short or too long, or if you're premenopausal. This will help to give them some insights on how you personally are methylating excess estrogens. A serum B12 test is always a good idea to see your B12 levels, and a serum, an RBC folate test is essential too to see how your folate levels are doing. Now, in terms of getting your intracellular levels of B12 tested, there's a test called methylmalonate, and this test can look into seeing what your intracellular, so inside the cell, levels of B12 are doing. So those are some assessments you can ask your doctor to do for you if you want to see how your MTHFR is affecting you, how bad your methylation might be, and then ways to support it. These are just some of the very vast array of information and insights into MTHFR. There's a lot more that I could cover, but we are already almost 40 minutes into this podcast. And I know it was a little bit all over the place, kind of jumping back and forth between some scientific terms and then different SNPs and what it means for us. But I'm hoping that you got enough information and understand that you can have the SNPs for MTHFR. It does not mean that you have poor methylation. It means you are susceptible to it. If your lifestyle is healthy, if you are eating lots of greens, if you're avoiding sugars and lowering your stress and sleeping well and exercising and doing everything right, avoiding alcohol especially, which is something that anyone with MTHFR should be doing. If you're doing all those things, your genetic SNPs probably are not affecting you. You probably have methylation and you're doing just fine. It's important to note, though, that if you have chronic health issues, if you do have symptoms of inflammation, heart issues, hormonal issues, etc., that you do consider that you might have a poor methylation issue, and then you might need to do things to support those genetic SNPs so that your body can methylate better, so you can start to support your health better. So the genetics are the gun, our lifestyle is the trigger. If you have a good lifestyle, you don't need to be stressing as much. At the end of the day, this is something that can be supported. So as scary as MTHFR might seem, and as it does make you more susceptible to a lot of really serious health issues, it's only if you are not doing anything for your methylation and your body is allowed to go on for so long without methylating properly, and then things start to just fall apart in our bodies. So that's the most important takeaway from this. You want to make sure that you have good B12, good folate levels, you're getting a lot of nutrition in, you're supporting your detox pathways, and you should be okay. And you can ask your doctor for those assessments that I mentioned not too long ago and see where you're at with all of this. But I hope that this was informational. There's so much more to this topic. And if this was interesting, I would highly recommend start doing some research into it a little bit more and seeing if, you can kind of dive into the topic more on your own. And if nutrigenomics and genetic testing is something you want to do, I offer nutrigenomic testing virtually, or a nutrigenomic protocol, I should say, virtually, where you would get your genetic testing done through 23andMe or Ancestry, and then we submit it into the Pure Genomics database. And then it takes all those SNPs that are really important to note, and it shows us what you might have as an imbalance or what alleles you have or variants. And then with all of that information, it'll helps us to be able to create a perfect protocol to support you where you may be lacking. So if that's something of interest to you, you can go ahead and click the link in the description below for more information on my website on what all of that entails. If you're looking to just do a little detox to support your body, I have a guide also in the podcast description as well, which you can look into. But really, at the end of the day, lead a healthy lifestyle, guys. Don't go out drinking every night. Don't put sleep on the back burner. Really prioritize good quality sleep. Practice and really implement meditation and deep breathing and balancing your stress and eating a really healthy, nutritious diet and moving your body. Doing these things will beat your genetics. These will beat any SNP that you have, and you will be able to perform and your body will be able to function like you don't have the SNPs at all. So that's where the priorities are. And if you're doing that, you should be fine. But if you have any questions on this topic, if you want me to do a part 2, if this wasn't explained enough or properly, because sometimes I'm not great at explaining things, just let me know and I will try to do a part 2 or maybe go more in depth in a video. But I do have some good content into MTHFR on my membership platform, holisticspring.org, if you want to learn more sooner. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. I hope you have a beautiful day or night wherever you are listening from, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.